Welcome everyone to an interview with Harold Goodwin. I'm Andrea from Canary Green, and today we are going to talk about responsible tourism and sustainable travel. It's a very big topic. So welcome, Harold. Thank you for taking the time.
I'm pleased to be here. I'm embarrassed that I've never been to the Canary Islands, but I'm fascinated to see that you've achieved so much, and I'm feeling slightly embarrassed that I didn't know about it. So I'm really pleased to be in touch with you.
Thank you. Let me introduce you a little bit. So, Harold, you're the Managing Director of the Responsible Tourism Partnership and advisor of the World Travel Market on its Responsible Tourism Program. You research on tourism, local economic development and poverty reduction, conservation and responsible tourism, working with the industry, with local communities, governments and conservationists, and that is amazing. So how did you get into responsible tourism?
Andrea, can I just say you've made me feel very tired. I hate it when people do that to me. It makes me realise I'm old and tired. I was tour leading around the world, travelling for free, essentially, tour leading groups of quite well-heeled adult education students to some of the world's greatest cultural and natural heritage sites. And I kept seeing that damned ecotourism slogan, which I have come to loathe. Take only photographs, leave only footprints. It just seems to me that's so exploitative. You know, I come from a country where we've wiped out most of our large, charismatic megafauna. We destroyed much of our nature, and we travel around the world to see it in other people's places. And it's the local communities who pay the price of maintaining all of that. And what we discovered when I did some research for the UK government is that our visits as tourists are often subsidised by the local taxpayer. We're not even meeting the cost of our visit to the national park. So I went on from that to do the research, and then worked with the South African government on responsible tourism and worked with UK tour operators on it. Out of that came the Cape Town Declaration, which I drafted, but it's the declaration that belongs to the conference in 2002. And after that came all the work on responsible tourism, which simply put is about making tourism better.
Yeah, simply put, but it's a big quest. Tell us more about responsible tourism. You know, what is it? It's not ecotourism. What's the difference? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, any kind of tourism can be more responsible. Some forms of tourism are more responsible than other forms of tourism, but it's perfectly possible to have completely irresponsible ecotourism where the label is just slapped on some appalling practice. So responsible tourism is really about saying, what are you going to do to make tourism better? What are you going to do to make tourism more sustainable? So one of the big issues we've taken up as the responsible tourism movement is visits to orphanages, because many orphanages around the world contain trafficked children. They become useful assets for the owner of the orphanage if they can attract tourists to donate money. So that was an issue we took up that wasn't taken up by sustainability or the green agenda. We see it as a very broad agenda. You're right about that, Andrea. It is a broad agenda, but we say it's about taking up the issues which matter locally and beginning to address them with local people. So responsibility is what you do. Sustainability is one of your objectives. And too many people talk about sustainability and do nothing.
Yeah, very true. Where do you see the whole tourism industry heading towards, and especially, you know, responsible tourism? Is it, you know, just trend word, or is it actually, you know, a necessity to head towards?
One of the things which is I think good about responsible tourism is that there is a trend towards it. You can see it in consumerism generally. You see it in the international surveys. I see it in the supermarket when I go. You know, there's more and more emphasis on responsibly sourced food, for example. There is a general consumer trend which extends beyond tourism. But the other point I'd make is that we have to do it, because if we don't, we won't have a product. You know, travel and tourism relies on there being attractive destinations to visit. If we allow them to degenerate, then we have nothing to sell. There's no reason to travel. The only reason I want to come to the Canary Islands, Andrea, and I really do, is I know it to be a beautiful place and very different from where I live in Kent. And I live in a beautiful place for now. But who knows what will happen if we don't actually take responsibility. And the evidence that we haven't taken responsibility exists in over-tourism. The over-tourism that we see around the world is a direct result of people talking about sustainability and not doing it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about over-tourism, just to understand?
Well, over-tourism, I don't think you have it in Tenerife, in the Canary Islands. You may, I don't know. But over-tourism happens when either the tourists or the community, or most likely both, just say that's enough. There's too much. The place is being spoiled. It's a very simple thing. Mostly people realize it at the same time. Occasionally one group will recognize it and the other doesn't, but in the main, communities and their visitors recognize that a place has become spoiled.
Yeah,
there's a lot of places I hope not to go back to, that I remember the way they were when I discovered them, and tourism has become so rampant in those places. So I'm not sure I want to go back. I want to remember them the way they were.
Yeah, I also remember places like that, and it doesn't feel good for the community, for you as a traveler, and it's just too much. So what could we do about it?
That's an impossible question to answer, Andrea, because the truth is that there are lots and lots of small answers. I mean, it's quite interesting. If you look at the places which have been really successful in dealing with it, and I'd pick out three which have been extraordinarily successful in my view. Barcelona, everybody knows where that is, particularly if you're in the Canary Islands. Amsterdam, which is doing a lot, but they're not talking about it very much, but they are doing a great deal. And then Kerala in India. Done it in different ways, but at the heart of all of those initiatives has been the engagement of the local community through democratic political processes. That's what all three destinations have in common. And what they've done is simply look at each of the problems that arises and address it. So there is no generic solution because there are many causes. People will say to me, for example, that water is a big issue, water supply. It is a big issue in many places, and it is a global issue because it occurs in many places around the world, but it doesn't occur everywhere. It's not in that sense. The only two issues which are, in my view, completely global are greenhouse gas emissions and plastics, particularly plastics which get into watercourses because they end up in the gyros in the sea. But all the other issues which arise, many of them do arise in different places all over the world, but they're not genuinely global issues because they can be dealt with effectively locally. We can sort them out. If you've got a litter problem in the Canaries, you can sort it locally. The water, where that plastic gets into the ocean, it's a different matter. That becomes a global issue because that litter rubbish will end up in one of the gyros in the ocean. Lots of different answers to lots of different problems is the answer.
So the biggest, responsible tourism's biggest challenges or obstacles, we know the problems, we can see the problems. What is the obstacle to have a solution, to create a solution, to change?
Okay, we've been running Responsible Tourism Awards now since 2004. When I look back at the kind of applications we were getting in 2004, you realize how much progress we've made when you look at the applications we get now. So there are lots now of good examples of what can be done, tried and tested ways of addressing these issues. The problem is that they're not being picked up widely enough. So if you look at the evidence, for example, on emissions, we keep talking about how people are tackling emissions, and some people are very effectively doing it, but a lot of people are doing nothing. And the result is that the emissions continue to accelerate, and that will have the consequences we know of. The single biggest problem we've got for tourism, I think, the biggest challenge, the most difficult thing to solve is aviation, because there are many countries around the world, and to some extent you live in one of them. There are many places around the world that seriously need aviation to maintain a tourism industry, and where if the tourism industry disappears, there will be a lot of economic hardship, a lot more than there already is. So actually cracking this problem is extremely important, and that's why we're beginning to campaign for hydrogen-powered aviation, which is the way some of the big players like Airbus are going, but we need to move much more rapidly to hydrogen-powered aviation. Aviation is the sixth largest if aviation was a country, it would be the sixth largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. To give you a sense of the scale of the problem. So that's our single biggest challenge.
Wow. Yeah. And locally, how can, local accommodations or excursions, or how can that become more sustainable or more responsible even?
What we say to businesses is think about what you do and what the local problems are, and just think, what could you do that would make it better? So if you're a guide, for example, rather than take people to the shops that maybe give you commission, you could develop a tour which takes you to meet the actual artist or the craftsperson, where you take them to that place, the person gets a fee for the visit. That means the tourist doesn't feel obliged to buy, but the tourist is getting some income, and the craft maker is getting some income, and the tourist is having a much better experience of talking to the craft worker, maybe getting a photograph of the person they're going to buy the craft from, maybe having a go at doing it. All kinds of enhancement of the tourist experience, which will be good for the tourist and good for the craft worker. It's the same with buying local food. There's nothing more pleasurable. I don't know if you do it in the Canary Islands, but actually going down to the port to buy the fish directly from the fisherman or the fisherwoman, taking it back to the hotel, being taught how to cook it in a local recipe by the chef or the cook in the hotel or guest house, and then having that for supper. The guest will pay more for that because it's a great experience, but it's also great for the local economy to be doing that. And we have an example from Faversham. We one of our fishermen, we've only got one left, he fishes oysters, and he sells them for £1 locally. The restaurant owners in London sell them for £5 on the menu, pay 50p each for them. It's much better for him if we can sell them locally, because he's getting the whole pound, not the 50p. Those are the things we need to think about, and most of these things actually make the guest experience better.
I absolutely agree. So who is responsible? Should we wait for the governments to make a move? Should we wait for the companies to change? Is the whole responsibility up to the traveler to choose? How can we get a bigger momentum in this issue?
Andrea, I'm often described as an old man in a hurry, which is a badge I wear with some pride. We all just need to do what we can do, and to remember that working with other people, working in partnerships, demonstrating to other people, encouraging other people, simply amplifies what we do. But in the end, it's down to all of us, whether we're traveling, whether we're running a restaurant, or being a guide, or running a tour operation, inbound or outbound. We all have to do what we can do, and we need to do it now. There's no excuse to wait. We've got solutions for nearly everything now. We just need to implement them, and many of those solutions are good for the bottom line, good for the traveler experience, and good for tourism.
Yes, exactly. Do you have any examples for on destinations that you think they nailed it? They are nailing responsible tourism.
There's lots of places which are nailing responsible tourism at the local level, but let me focus on some of the big ones, and I come back to the ones I mentioned before. There's on my website, there's a report on what's been done in Barcelona, and they are slowly tackling every one of the major local issues, and they've experimented, they've worked out ways of doing it. In Kerala, again, we've written that up, and there's a link on my publications page on haroldgoodwin.info. They focused on the three big issues there. One was litter, one was benefiting local crafters and food producers by getting direct sales to tourists, so they do that through village life experience tours. And then the other one was selling into the hotels, and the hotels' problem is that they need volume of bananas or whatever the product is. No individual farmer on his own, no small-scale farmer can meet that volume, so they created producer cooperatives, and the producers come together to sell at volume. Those things have just transformed the local economy. So now the community feels it's benefiting from tourism, and tourism is coming in a way that brings sustainable development to the whole community. It's possible to turn it around. And they've not spent a lot of money. They've just changed the way they do the business. It isn't about much of the time, it's not about big government grants. It's about changing the way you do things to make a better tourist experience, get tourists to stay longer, give them more experiences, and benefit the community by doing that.
Exactly. And Harold, if we want to learn more about you, your work, you know, someone who is working within tourism wants to learn more, where can we find you and more about your work?
I'd ask that you just put up a slide at the end of this with the Responsible Tourism Partnership website.
Yes.
And my own personal website. It's got all my publications on it, and those two things. It's also, if I might say so, it's worth subscribing to Responsible Tourism News, which comes out once a month with the 10 biggest stories in responsible tourism from that month. And I'll certainly be promoting this in that channel. And Andrea, if we're finishing, can I just say again how embarrassed I am that I've only just discovered what your organization is doing in the Canaries. I wish that there were more of these kinds of groups, and I think you've achieved a lot, but I should keep pushing you to do more.
Thank you so much.